Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well, having a good day. It is incredibly stormy here today over here in the UK. So if you can hear some wind or some noise in the background, that's what it's in. It sounds like we're in the middle of a hurricane. Nevertheless, talking about winds of change, talk about a segue there. AEW moving to TBS. That was the big announcement yesterday, wasn't it? That AEW Dynamite will be moving to TBS in January. But also, in addition to that, AEW will be debuting a new 1-hour show on Friday nights this coming August on TNT, which will also eventually move to TBS with Dynamite, called AEW Rampage. So certainly big news. And this is kind of the Rampage news had been expected for a while. The long fabled third hour of Dynamite had been something that had been teased for a long time when it comes to Tony Khan. And actually, I think it had been delayed a little bit because of the pandemic. Tony Khan has said really early in 2020, he might have even said it in 2019, but certainly it was in 2020 actually. I think it's when they signed that new deal, that contract extension, those updated terms with WarnerMedia. This was in 2020, the deal that made AEW profitable in its first year of existence. The part of that announcement was that a third hour of Dynamite, or a third hour of original AEW programming, was coming to TNT, was coming to WarnerMedia, and everyone throughout last year had said, well, when's it going to be? What's it going to consist of? All this kind of stuff. And obviously, as I mentioned, the pandemic very much delayed those plans, but we have officially a name for it. It's Rampage. It's going to be on a Friday night on TNT, and it's going to move to TBS with AEW Dynamite in January of 2022. So AEW Dynamite will have a new home in 2022 because yesterday AEW and WarnerMedia announced that AEW Dynamite will move to TBS beginning in January of 2022. Until then, Dynamite will continue to air on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on TNT, which has been its home since the show premiered in October of 2019. Now, AEW also announced that its new show, AEW Rampage, will premiere on Friday, August 13 at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on TNT. Very important that time. We'll touch on that in a second. The show will also shift to TBS in 2022. TNT will also host 4 annual specials for AEW as well as part of this updated agreement when it comes to WarnerMedia and AEW. So this is the press statement. It says, quote, "The All Elite Wrestling franchise will grow its footprint with a move of AEW Dynamite to TBS in January 2022. Until then, the presence on TNT remains robust in 2021 with the addition of the new hour-long series AEW Rampage, debuting on August 13 at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. AEW Rampage is the third hour of high-octane wrestling featuring the world-renowned stars of AEW. In addition, TNT will debut 4 new professional wrestling specials annually, continuing to garner and grow AEW's audience until the move to TBS in 2022. Now, we have a lot of quotes coming from Tony Khan and the general manager of TBS and TNT. We won't get into that because it's press talk, but obviously, it's massively significant. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the discussions about AEW having the third hour, if you will, of original content on TNT, WarnerMedia, had been expected for a while. So that's no big, real surprise there. I think the day that it was going to air was always really the point of contention as to where it was going to go, given that wrestling is on every single day at this point now, in this current landscape, whether it's Raw Monday, NXT on Tuesdays, Dynamite on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Impact, Friday, SmackDown, and then on certain weeks you have a special event on a Saturday, whether it might be an AEW event. I know they're moving a lot of those to Sundays, but even an Impact Plus event or an Impact Plus pay-per-view, or you could have Sundays a pay-per-view of WWE or AEW as well. It's very difficult, and lots of people were thinking, where's it going to air? They don't really want to be in competition with WWE in terms of the time slots, especially going up against the bigger shows in terms of Raw and SmackDown. And in addition to that, of course, AEW does actually have programming on in certain days of the week, like Monday and Tuesday. Of course, you've got Dark Elevation on YouTube, and then you've got Dark Tuesday on YouTube as well. So they've got Monday and Tuesday. They have content on. They've got content on Wednesday, and now they're going to have content on Fridays. That's the date. Now, some people may look at that and say, well, that's pretty bold of AEW to compete with SmackDown on Friday. It's WWE's biggest show at this point. It's on network television. It's on Fox. If they went head-to-head with that, even for 1 hour, they would get crushed. That's why it's smart that AEW Rampage is going to be taking place at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So the moment that SmackDown goes off the air, Rampage goes on the air on TNT and then eventually TBS. If anything, if anything, I mean, and time will tell when it comes to this, because having a pro wrestling show airing in that time slot of 10 to 11, it will be really interesting to see what ratings they get. If you want to compare it to Monday Night Raw, I mean, it's different because they've had 2 hours prior to it, but on Monday Night Raw, that third hour is distinctly very, very difficult for WWE in terms of the rating. Historically, it goes, first hour is up, second hour is down, third hour is way, 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 way down. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the same thing for AEW. We don't know. But historically, that 10 to 11 time slot can be quite difficult. Previously, of course, it hasn't always been the case. Raw used to air from 9 to 11. If I'm correct, I might be wrong. Now you can correct me, but I don't know. It'll be interesting. Fridays, historically as well, aren't the best date for pro wrestling. And you might say, well, SmackDown's had success on Fridays. Well, initially when SmackDown was moved to Fridays by UPN and WWE in the mid-2000s, there was a lot of pushback from those in WWE at the time because they felt, and I suppose rightfully so, maybe not so much in the more modern landscape in this sort of COVID world that we're living in, but there was a thought process of not a lot of people are inside on a Friday and want to watch television. A lot of people are going out and about. Their weekend's just beginning. It's the end of the work week. They've got plans. They're going to see friends, family. They're going out to clubs, restaurants, seeing friends, doing whatever. They're celebrating the end of the week. And the thought process was, how many people are watching television in that time slot between 8 to 10 on a Friday or between 9 and 11 on a Friday? And it's a good point. It is a good point. Now, again, as I mentioned, in the current COVID world that we're living in, obviously a lot of people are at home. More people are at home than before. Once we get to August, people are going to start getting out and about. They're already starting to get out and about again. It will be interesting to see how Dynamite, or Rampage rather, does in that time slot on the Friday. I suppose the way that AEW could look at it is that SmackDown could almost serve as a bit of a lead-in. I don't know if I really properly believe that one, in the sense that you might be a bit fatigued of watching SmackDown for 2 hours on the Friday. Then are you in the wrestling mood, so you watch Rampage, or you go, I'm a bit wrestling out, I don't want to watch anymore, and then you don't watch it. You've got to change the channel to go to TNT or TBS anyway. It's going to be very interesting. I think that's a bit of a working experiment, that Friday show, and it's going to be fascinating to see. When it comes to the move to TBS, we'll touch on this in a second because there look to be some reasons behind it. I think it's interesting that Tony Khan only a couple of weeks ago is saying TNT's our home, we're not moving off TNT, we have a contract with TNT, and then, or WarnerMedia, to air on TNT in that time slot, and then next thing you know, they're being moved to TBS. So this might be a bit of a recent thing. I think obviously the NHL have played into it, and we'll touch on this in a second. It's even been confirmed by the general manager of TNT and TBS that the NHL, WarnerMedia acquiring the NHL, obviously airing on TNT in a Wednesday night time slot, has forced this in essence. And obviously the NBA airs on TNT as well. So I think, in essence, to be honest, for AEW, whilst they may like the history of being on TNT for the whole Monday Nitro feel, it's probably the right move. They can't, if WarnerMedia have their hearts set on airing the NBA and the NHL on TNT, AEW, if they start getting preempted time and time again and getting moved around, it's only a matter of time before things start going downhill. And you have to look at not only the ratings, but you have to look at brand perception. If you're getting moved around and bumped around to all of these different nights because of these other franchises, whether it is big sporting franchises like the NHL, like the NBA, it doesn't look good for AEW. So having a regular time slot on a channel isn't a bad thing. And again, I don't profess to be an expert on this. I'm hardly an expert on American television, American cable networks, or anything like that, because I'm over here in the UK. Ask me about Sky and BT and I can probably give you a better answer. From the research that I've seen, and this is why I kind of left it a day to really get into this video, because I wanted to do my research. I don't want to be one of these people. And we saw a lot of this on social media yesterday. A lot of people suddenly become experts on ratings, demographics, time slots, cable networks, all that kind of stuff. I don't profess to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. I'm not one of those people that suddenly, because something's in the news, I suddenly become an expert on it. This is just opinion. From the research that I have seen and from the journalists that I have seen, there isn't much difference between the availability of TNT and TBS. And there isn't much difference between the viewing figures of TNT and TBS. So as far as I'm aware, there isn't going to be hardly any difference in terms of viewership of going to TNT and TBS. Now, obviously, some people might be we see how important patterns are in pro wrestling viewership on television. Monday Night Raw, I think the reason it gets 1.8 million viewers most weeks is just people are in the habit of watching Raw on a Monday. So it's going to be interesting to see if just changing the channel, is that going to change things or not? We don't know. Time will tell on that one. But it's certainly interesting. I like the idea of the specials as well. I think that kind of goes back to the whole sort of Clash of Champions vibe that WCW used to have with Turner back in the day. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, when it comes to TNT and the history that has with WCW, Monday Nitro, TBS arguably has a greater history with pro wrestling in terms of WCW lineage. And I'm not saying AEW's WCW, but they do like to tap into that, especially with their agreement that they have with WarnerMedia. TBS has a far greater history. We're talking 605 and on the Turner Superstation, and having NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions on TBS, all that kind of stuff, and having, as I mentioned, the Clash of Champions show on TBS. Arguably, TBS has far more pro wrestling history and lineage than TNT ever has. So that's going to be interesting as well to see if maybe AEW tries to tap into that. But their presence on TNT isn't over. As I mentioned, they're going to be on there for the remainder of the year. They're going to have the second show on there as well. And obviously, they're going to have these specials that, again, I don't know if that begins this year or that comes into effect once they move to TBS. But it's interesting. It's a very interesting and big announcement. In the grand scheme of things, does it change a lot? Wow, obviously a new show changes a lot. When it comes to Dynamite, I don't know. Time will tell. I'm fascinated to see the viewing figures and the ratings and what that third show looks like. We've got a ton more information when it comes to this because it is a massive story. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to the reasoning why did AEW Dynamite get moved? Why did AEW programming in general, why is that moving to TBS? Well, it's pretty much the NHL and the NBA are the main reasons behind it. Now, on April 27, the NHL and Turner WarnerMedia officially announced a 7-year media rights agreement that will see the regular season, Stanley Cup playoffs, and Stanley Cup final games televised on TNT and TBS. Now, the deal is set to begin in the 2021-2022 season. Now, a lot of fans at the time wondered how this would impact AEW, considering that obviously there was a feeling that USA Network moved NXT to Tuesdays because they were expecting to get the NHL, but now that WarnerMedia had got it, would that affect AEW Dynamite? What's going on? Well, we now know that Dynamite's moving to TBS beginning in January, and it's pretty much for this reason. Because speaking to the New York Post, Brett White, general manager of TBS, TNT, and True TV for WarnerMedia, discussed AEW's move and how the NHL deal played a role in this decision. This is what he had to say, quote, "It's very interesting. Both TBS and TNT have an incredibly storied history of wrestling. So the idea of us being able to put more AEW onto TBS is a natural fit." Very true. Did the NHL have anything to do with it? Sure. NHL had something to do with it. NBA had something to do with it. The COVID schedule, the ton of preemptions. When we looked where the consumer's going to be, where wrestling fans were going to be, we want to give them the most opportunity to consume as many shows as possible. We felt TBS had an opportunity to be the network and the best platform for the expansion. And to be honest, I don't disagree with him. And I know people are very hesitant, especially given WCW's history with the corporate suits when it comes to WarnerMedia, Turner, whatever you want to call them. But he's not wrong there. And look, the NHL and the NBA are massive sporting franchises. They are massive money spinners for WarnerMedia and for Turner. And let's face it, AEW can make WarnerMedia a lot of money. I think they probably have made WarnerMedia some money so far. At the moment, they aren't as viable sporting franchises as the NBA and the NHL. They are going to take precedent over them. But for me, it's reassuring that these corporate people there are looking at this saying, look, we don't want to cannibalize AEW. We don't want to ruin AEW. We feel like we've got something good with AEW. We don't want to ruin that just because we've brought in this other sporting franchise. And we don't want to disenfranchise the fans of AEW. We don't want to have AEW fans not knowing when the show's going to air. We don't want AEW fans having to stay up super late to watch a show or change their viewing patterns or anything like that. They want to give AEW as much stability as possible. And if that means moving them to TBS, where the exposure is just the same and they still got their lineage, that's the right thing to do. I think it's interesting that after the NHL deal with WarnerMedia was signed, AEW president Tony Khan stated it would have to be a good deal for AEW if they were to move, and it kind of feels like that it is, because there are reports that AEW is getting a pretty penny, if you will, for this move, which I think is quite interesting. So, as I mentioned, there's so much news when it comes to this announcement. So AEW is reportedly receiving several $1 million under this expanded TV agreement with WarnerMedia. So as I mentioned, it was announced that the new AEW Rampage show will premiere Friday, August 13 at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. The 1 hour show will air in that weekly time slot on TNT until both Rampage and AEW Dynamite move to TBS in 2022. While the two AEW TV shows moving to TBS next year, TNT will still air AEW programming in the form of 4 supercard specials per year. Now, financial terms of the extended agreement have not been revealed as of right now, but PW Insider is reporting that word making the rounds is that AEW is receiving in the area of an 8-figure payday from WarnerMedia, which would be anywhere between $10 million and just under $100 million. Now, the news is seen as a positive within AEW. There's also a feeling that this is a way to increase AEW's footprint on multiple networks and additional content to produce. It was announced in January 2020, as I mentioned, that AEW and WarnerMedia had extended their TV deal for Dynamite on TNT through 2023 and had agreed on a new series now known as Rampage. Now, sources reported then that the extension was for 4 years and it was worth $175 million or just under $45 million per year. That deal reportedly included an option for TNT to re-sign AEW in 2024 at a significantly increased price. So, obviously, as I mentioned just then, Tony Khan says, look, if they want to move us, it's going to cost them a pretty penny. It's going to cost them a lot of money, and I think it probably has. That's a good thing for AEW. There's been a lot of criticism, hasn't there, about AEW Dark Elevation and AEW Dark. I've been kind of one of them. I think sometimes their shows are unbelievably long. They feel really gratuitously long, and people are saying, why are the shows this long where they feature mainly squash matches and all that kind of stuff? And the general feeling was that AEW wanted just to produce content, because the feeling was at some point, the more content they have, it's easier to sell to networks in the future. So AEW, if you look at their business plan here, and again, I'm not a business expert, if you look at their business plan though, they're going to be producing shows on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, and a Friday. Think about all the content they'll have in such a short period of time, and they're getting paid to do so. It's a win-win for AEW. And then eventually, 2-3 years time, at the end of their contract with WarnerMedia, maybe at the end of 2024, they can shop around to networks. They'll be an established brand with all of this content. They can maybe even launch their own streaming service, and that's when they really start to make significant amounts of money. So I think that this is kind of played into AEW's hands slightly. I know some people on social media that really don't look at these things objectively. I've looked at it saying, see, already AEW being moved to another network. The network's still the same. It's under the same umbrella. They're getting paid more money for it, and they're producing another show, which in the future will help them. To be honest, networks nowadays are so desperate for content. They're so desperate for content. That's why Raw's 3 hours, because the USA Network's desperate for content, and wrestling does draw reasonably well. I know we talk about the ratings and not being great and all that kind of stuff. In comparison to a lot of other programming on television, wrestling is, you know what you're going to get in terms of the ratings most of the time. So it's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer. Now, obviously, a lot of people have been talking about the TNT Championship. Of course, the TNT Championship is named after the network that it appears on. So is the TNT Championship going to become a TBS Championship? What's going on with that? Well, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case, because Dave Meltzer has said the plan right now is to keep the title as is. Now, I think that's probably I think that's probably, fair, isn't it? I think that's probably fair. There was some discussion as well about moving to TBS. Were things going to change in terms of, blood and profanity? Obviously, AEW is hardly, TV MA or anything like that, but there was some concern about moving to TBS. Are they going to tone down a little bit on the blood? Are they going to standards and practices in terms of any of the profanity? They do like to swear a little bit on that show, curse a little bit on the show. Is that going to change? As far as Meltzer is saying, there's going to be no difference on that. Time will tell. Time will tell when it comes to that. I think, remember, and I think it's important to mention here that when the crowd go holy, you know what, Tony Khan told the crowd not to do that because WarnerMedia executives don't like that. So these things change over time. As far as right now, them saying, no, nothing's going to change, we'll see. We'll see when it comes to that. As far as the TNT Championship, I think they should just go and call it the Turner Championship, TV Championship, or whatever. The TNT Championship being on TBS seems really odd to me. Really odd. I can't see how much longer that works. I know they're saying, right now that won't change. I would be really surprised. I would be really surprised. And maybe they do a title change on the first TBS episode and they change it to the TBS Championship. I don't know. Maybe they add another championship and there's the TNT Championship and the TBS Championship. I think it's odd. And to be honest, like I said, I think I would be surprised if they don't change that. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to this increase in revenue with this expanded television deal, fans have already started speculating if this means that AEW has a bigger budget to attract possible big free agent names. Of course, in the past, when it came to WCW, having people on board like Hogan and Savage, or the promise of having things like Nitro, facilitated them bringing in more names like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash because of the budget that Nitro gave them. So people have said, well, just moving to TBS and an extra show, does that mean AEW has the budget to make a play for a Brock Lesnar, a Daniel Bryan? Now, Meltzer dismissed the likelihood of signing Lesnar to AEW. As far as Daniel Bryan, he said AEW's added finances most likely won't make a huge difference. And to be honest, I mean, Tony Khan, let's say he has a budget, and I think that's probably true. Every show does, even the biggest sporting franchises that are owned by states at this point, they all have budgets. That is true. But if Tony Khan really wanted to sign Brock Lesnar or Daniel Bryan or CM Punk, he's got the money to do it. And he is, at the end of the day, whilst he is the president of the company and the head of creative, the general manager, he's got all of these titles, he is still an investor. And if he wants to invest money and by signing someone that he thinks can make a difference, he'll do it. So I don't know if necessarily the move to TBS really affects that. An interesting story about this is that initially, and I find this fascinating, Tony Khan was asked by WarnerMedia if instead of adding a third show, they just wanted to do a third hour of Dynamite, in the sense that making Dynamite a 3-hour show, which is, I mean, crazy. I think it really is crazy that they asked him to make it a 3-hour show, and that's it's nuts. It's nuts. This is what Tony Khan had to say when talking about Dynamite possibly going to 3 hours and Rampage and how it all came about. This is what Khan had to say, quote, "It's great for everyone here. It's big news. We knew that another show was coming this year. I've been saying for a long time that we were going to do another night, 1 hour. I didn't want to do 3 hours of Dynamite. They being WarnerMedia, asked at one point if I wanted to do 3 hours of Dynamite. It came up about doing a third hour, and I said I really believed in doing it on another night." This is why I think it's important to have wrestling people involved, isn't it? That's why it's important to have wrestling people involved in these kind of negotiations. What on earth? I mean, Monday Night Raw has been 3 hours since 2012. Prior to that, Nitro, after being a 2-hour show, became a 3-hour show in the late 90s. Arguably, it going to 3 hours, it didn't kill Nitro. It was already on the way down, but it certainly sped things up when it came to the demise of Nitro, because 3 hours is just too long for a pro wrestling show. Some could even argue that 2 hours might be too long for a pro wrestling show. Nevertheless, 3 hours is way too long. And has anyone watched an episode of Monday Night Raw since 2012 when it became 3 hours? It's nearly been 10 years since it's been a 3-hour show. Has anyone watched that show since 2012 and thought, you know what, this is right, it doesn't feel too long? No. And they would know that. The executives know that. Like I said earlier on, it comes down to content. Their thought process is that, well, we could have another show on after Dynamite, or we could put a film on like they do when it comes to TNT after Dynamite, but it won't give the rating or won't give the viewership that Dynamite does. So if we have another hour of Dynamite, just think of an extra hour of decent ratings. But they know that even people in WWE today, I think everyone, even Vince McMahon, the only reason he takes Raw as 3 hours is because of the money that USA Network gives them. That's the only reason. And even they know that a 3-hour show is too much. So I find it staggering, absolutely staggering, that those in WarnerMedia went, should we just make it 3 hours? When did you learn from your mistakes? Nitro, Raw. It's awful. It's awful making it a 3-hour show. It's the biggest problem with Monday Night Raw. There are certainly other problems, but it's one of the biggest problems with Raw is that 3-hour format. It's awful. Absolutely awful. So I was stunned to hear that news. I really was. I think that was absolutely crazy. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of this news about AEW Dynamite and AEW Rampage moving to TBS in January and the new Rampage show debuting on TNT in August this year? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.